Next we're going to prep the fuel tank. The standard line fuel tank is fine to use with gas or gasoline or petrol. The standard stoppers are okay, including this stopper here. However, you will need to use a different type of line for the clunk, which I'll talk about later. So what I like to do is I like to block off the central hole using the plug that was originally on the outside. You'll find that it doesn't fit perfectly, so you'll need to use a bit of sealant to seal that to make sure it doesn't leak. I also like to put another pressure nipple here for my that is for my fuel return from the primer bulb, and I use the original pressure port on the top for a vent line. Now the clunk I like to use is a Lynx clunk. It's a MOAS, mother of all suckers, fuel clunk, and it works very well. It'll suck the last drop and you won't notice. What I tend to do is I put a bit of extra weight on. There's just another nut on the end, just to give it a bit more weight so that it moves around a bit better. The fuel line is actually the Zenoa black fuel line that comes with your motor. It works really well. And the other thing I've done is I've put extra bits on the end there just to give a bit more tension, just cut off a little bit of the tube and slip it over the end on both ends. Okay, now you can notice I use a fairly short clunk. I find this works fine. Other people recommend that you use a much longer one. I'll just show you there. So that's roughly where mine sits, just to clear the back wall, and that seems to work well for me. So I'll just show you that. Now we're going to look at the side frames. These side frames are 2mm G10. I find that they're not quite as stiff as carbon fibre, but they're very tough and don't tend to break as easily in a crash. So first thing to do, and it's good practice, is to get rid of all the sharp edges. I use a manicure file to do it, and it allows me to get around, also inside. Fairly easy to do. Now the other thing that we need to check is to make sure the anti-rotation bracket fits in the holes on the frame. You may need to file out the openings because it's a pretty snug fit. Make sure that they fit in there, because it'll make your life a lot easier when you put the two side frames together. Now the other thing you can do also is install the fuel tank rubbers. Fairly easy. Make sure they sit in all the way. Now go ahead and do this to both the frames, and then we'll start installing some of the components. Okay, I've built a fair few of these, and this is how I like to build them now. I like to start with the right hand side frame and install these various components. It makes it easier to put together later on. So what I've done is the clutch stack that we had completed earlier on. That's been installed with the clutch bell. Also install the main shaft blocks, the tail block, the fuel tank, and I'll just flip this over, the canopy mounts, and the frame brace. Now the frame brace is there to help hold the main shaft, main gear and pinion all in alignment, and it works very well. Remember to put that on as you're installing these components. So this is the right hand side. So you see the fuel tank with the nipples on this side. If you install this side first, makes it easy to put the other side frame on, because the other side of the fuel tank is smooth. Okay. I just want to talk quickly about the bolts that you'll use to put this together. So we have our standard aligned top head M3 bolts. I find that the newer versions are quite acceptable and they don't tend to strip as easily. If you're worried about them stripping, you can use these very nice Lynx bolts. They got a much deeper hex on them. And with the frame braces, you actually use normal standard M3 by 12 cap screws, and they go through the frame brace. Now the frame brace on the other side, let me show you the other side, it's got these recesses that line themselves up in the frames. Okay, and it's got an M3 3mm hole in the middle. The other thing you can use are you can buy these washers, these aluminium washers, which work quite well, and just use a standard 3mm bolt, so that helps stop your screws sticking to the frames. You can now present the side frame that we just built up to the base frame and motor. Pretty simple. I'll just take it apart. So what you need to do is you need to slide it down over the clutch and line up with the bottom mounts. Now it's very important that you actually line up the motor mounting bolts first. Okay, so these holes here, these holes here, because there's a bit of flex in the bottom plate, we need to make sure that they're in the right position and do those up first to ensure the alignment of the clutch. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I've firstly aligned and tightened up the motor mounting bolts. Then I've gone and installed the 4 bolts on the bottom to mount to the lower blocks. Now at this stage, what I like to do is I like to actually install my servos, my cyclic servo. Just makes it a bit easier as well. I won't do it now, but it's just a good suggestion. Makes it much easier for later on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to install the other side frame and complete the frame build. Okay, with the other side frame, the thing you need to do as well is check for the fitment of that anti-rotation bracket as well. Make sure it fits nice and snug. Install your fuel tank rubber, and I like to install my canopy mounts too at this stage. It makes it easier. It's pretty fiddly later on. And if you want to go one step further, you can actually install your elevator mount and your tail servo too, if you like. So we're going to go ahead and fit this side frame to the rest of the helicopter. The other side frame has now been installed. Motor mount bolts, lower frame bolts, rear block, frame braces in place, and all the other bolts for the other bearing blocks. Next step is to have a look at the electronics install.